Hi, this is Kim Hammer with your devotion taken from 1 Samuel chapter 21. Have you ever had something happen in life that at the time it did, you didn't even pay any attention or you didn't think it was anything of significance? In fact, it could have been occurring and you didn't even realize that it was occurring because it served of no value to you at that time, or that was not your intent as to why you were involved in a situation. Such is the case with David in chapter 21. David came to the priest Ahimelech. And the reason that he came to the priest was because he wanted to find provisions for himself, but also for the few followers that had identified themselves at that time with David. We know that the number was not significant because the provisions that the priest gave to David was not significant. In fact, David didn't even ask for a lot, he asked for a little. So we know that the followers of David at this time were not very many. But he went to the priest because he needed provisions, food, for his army that had begun to follow him and for himself. And when the priest gave him, or what the priest gave him, was actually the leftover bread that was not used in order to be dedicated unto the Lord. So it was like day-old bread is what we might think of it. And he gave it to David, and David took it. And before David left, he said, by the way, do you have any swords? Do you have any weapons? I have none, and there's nothing I can use to defend myself. And the priest went, and he got a sword. Now what is unique about this sword is this is the sword that David used to cut off the head of Goliath that he had killed just using a smooth stone and his excellent expertise as a shepherd with a sling. David had used that sling and that stone, and he brought down Goliath. But then you remember how that he went to Goliath and he took Goliath's sword, and that's what he used to cut off his head. David, it would appear to all indication, didn't even know what happened to that sword or where it went. But God knew where it went, and God had it reserved for David for just the right time. The priest went and got the sword, and he presented it to David. He said, this is the sword that you used to cut off Goliath's head. Now, we know that David didn't even know that the priest had it because he asked for a sword. He said, I have nothing. If he knew that the priest had it, he would have said, give me the sword that you've got that I used to cut off Goliath's head. But he didn't say that. What he said was, I need a sword. I need something to defend myself. I have nothing. Now what happened to it and how it got into the hands of the priest, the only thing we can conclude is that God had it reserved for him and God preserved it for this specific time. Now there was another individual there that was listening, and his name was Doeg. Doeg was part of Saul's entourage, if you would. In fact, the Bible says that he was his chief shepherd, and he had come to the priest to purify himself. But the Bible also tells us, if you'll read the scriptures in 21, that God detained him. Now his business was all done as far as purifying himself with the priest, and by this time he should have been gone. But the reality is, the Bible says that he had him there for a purpose. Later in the chapter we'll reveal what that purpose is. But it seems more than coincidental, seems more than ironical, if you would, that God would have this priest in the hand, or that God would have the sword of Goliath that David used to kill him in the possession of this priest that David came to simply to get just some food for himself and for his followers. And that a person would be detained there in order to listen to the conversation that took place between the priest and David, a guy that should have been gone by now, but God had detained him. And later, we'll see how this plays out in the events. Have you ever had something happen that at the time you thought nothing about it, maybe didn't even pay attention, but later in life as you look back you see it was all the hand of the Lord moving? That's because God sees our life from a different vantage point. Pay attention to the details because God may be preparing to use them later in your life.